So the next thing then became, okay, what should be the size of our GDP? So St. Lucia's GDP is $1.7 billion with 170,000 people. The GDP of Barbados is $5 billion with 270,000 people. The GDP of Bahamas is $12 billion with 370,000 people. Nassau is $8 billion. Paradise Island is $4 billion. Aruba, 110,000 people, has a GDP of $3.5 billion. So I can easily say, looking at people around my area, that 1.7 billion is not enough. And that more than likely we should be at a minimum of 4 billion. But if we really want to be pushing ourselves, we need to be upwards of $6 or $7 billion. So the question becomes, what are the constraints for me to do that? So clearly tourism, the IT sector, the new orange economy, financial services, these are the things that are really going to help now create an economy of $4 billion or $6 billion. And so I say that because then I understand what are the infrastructural needs I have. I have to have an airport that can probably handle 3 to 4 times as many people I'm currently getting.
Correct.
I have to have a road network system that now can cope with bringing produce, bringing staff, and also coping with all of the other spillovers. Because if your hotel sector is going to grow, your financial sector is going to grow, your transportation sector is going to grow. We need more water because now there's going to be greater consumption. Sewage, sustainable development in terms of land use. Ports can't have a cruise ship port with a cargo port because already the cargo is being squeezed out. So if you now double or triple the size of your economy, there's no way that you can do that. So it's about creating a dedicated port. So this is not an overly complicated process. It's just to be able to do it and identify what those priorities are, which we have done. And so what we're in the process of doing is creating space for that. So we were constrained because we were running deficits on our government side. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we ring-fenced our recurrent revenue and our recurrent expenditure. And then we did some things that the World Bank and the IMF didn't agree on. So it took me, I remember my first meeting in Washington, D.C., I spent almost 2 days, 4 hours at a time, meeting to convince them. I never did. You know, the only final nail in the coffin for them was I said, okay, guys, 10 of the most indebted middle-income countries in the world come from CARICOM. So I think that that's evidence enough that whatever policies you have not worked.
That's not
okay. St. Lucia's failure is not going to in any way undermine the world. So allow me to try something different. And that difference, if we're successful, it might help us with some of the other countries. Okay? If I fail, it's my political loss that we're going to fail with. And what we did is we created an airport tax and we created a gas tax. We didn't allow that money to go into the central coffer. And we've used those funds to now fund our capital investment. Okay. So what we're getting is not an increase. We are getting an increase in the amount of debt, but you're not going to cause that debt to be unviable, meaning it is not coming from the same revenue stream. All the new debt is being funded by a separate tax, which is not part of my central coffer. I also lowered taxes in my country because I felt that we'd reached the point of diminishing returns with taxes. And so the bank said, oh, if you lower the VAT rate, it's going to cost you $55 million. If you increase the price of gas, it's going to create inflation. And if you increase the airport tax, you're going to see a drop in your tourism arrivals. And therefore, your economy is just going to die. So what did we see? We saw that the arrivals went up by 11%. My loss in VAT revenue my first year was only 15 million, and today we're earning the same amount of money on a lower rate. And that there was no inflation because the reduction in the VAT rate offset the increase in the gas rate.
And you've had the buy-in of the people, obviously. Initially,
I think the people were frustrated. I think the people were, we had a stagnant economy. We had an economy that really was failed and really was falling down the precipice very, very quickly. I mean, we're talking about in 2003, we were spending $33 million on interest. By 2015, we were at 170 million. Now, interest is painful because this is not money that's going into any investment.
Exactly.
And so the question is, what was the money borrowed for? The money was borrowed to cover the deficits. So it wasn't even to say you were borrowing money to build infrastructure to grow capacity. You were borrowing money to pay for bad decisions and overexpending and just not running your house
In order.
properly. And so it was to try to reverse all of those things. So the first year, I had to agree not to spend any of the additional money. So I lost a year in order to be able to convince everybody. But the tax rate and those things really started spurring on. And you could see the economy recovering. Because if you're going to collect the same amount of money previously on a lesser tax, what it means is that the turnover in business was greater. So people are purchasing more. If people are purchasing more, you're now seeing the economy starting to be able to pick back up.
But what about the naysayers out there who will say that you're only concentrating on, that your priority is tourism, but not health, for example, on this side of the island?
Yeah, that's not true. My manifesto, and again, we have to go back to what I learned in opposition and what I learned previously in government. I learned as a political party that you cannot wait to get into government to have a plan. Right? You have to come to government with a plan. And even with that, it's tough. So far less if you get into government and you now want to start building consensus, and it's crazy. So as far as I'm concerned, an election is a referendum and it's a vote on your manifesto. And so that the public service needs to know that this policy that we have has been voted on democratically.
And approved.
This is approved and we're going to move forward. And our manifesto came out of our vision, mission, and values. Okay, so the mission and vision values of my party is that we're going to advocate for a globally competitive education system, affordable quality healthcare, public safety, and economic opportunity. Right? Those are the 4 pillars of what my government believes. So we think that a globally competitive education system is that you must have an education system that allows you to compete against people coming into SaintLucia, and with the understanding that many of you might leave, and that you have to have an education system that allows you to do that.
Correct.
And then, like Estonia, it's creating an education system that creates where you're not thinking of your country as a border anymore, but you're thinking as borderless, and that the globe is your whole thing. Affordable healthcare, and quality healthcare. So this idea of universal healthcare, not working. We can get up and think, oh, we're going to build universal healthcare, right? But how are you going to do it? And everybody's struggling around the world.
Everybody.
On how you're going to be able to do that.
Even the great NHS is struggling.
So I would say to you, about 50 to 60,000 people in my country do not have access to healthcare.
50 to 60,000 people.
And it's because they can't afford it. So it's not to say they can't go to the hospital, but if in fact the doctor gives them a prescription, can't buy it. If they have to do a major operation,
they can't afford it.
So what's happening is people are literally waiting until they have to be amputated. They're waiting until they have to go on the dialysis. They're waiting until they almost really have a stroke because their whole body's starting to shut down from high blood pressure. So how do we resolve that problem? So we're saying it's healthcare insurance. And how we're going to make healthcare insurance work is that government will pay the salaries of all the doctors and nurses in the secondary and primary level healthcare services. We'll pay the utility fees. We'll pay for all the capital investment. So let's take those costs off the table, right? So the insurance that we want to put in place will cover for private doctor visits, prescriptions, and basic surgeries to begin with.
Okay.
All right? Now, the benefit of that is that everybody now will have a card and now they can go to the doctor. Once my entire population starts going to the doctor and I now have an absolute understanding of the health of my nation, how many pre-diabetics I have, where the conditions of people, the Ministry of Health now can now put together programs targeted to that, and I can now measure the success of those programs. So what's great about, well, not so great, but it's great with high blood pressure and diabetes in particular, they're non-communicable diseases.
Correct.
These are lifestyle.
Correct.
These are things that we can change. All right. So all of a sudden, getting people on proper medication for blood pressure and also for diabetes, you start slowing down now the flow of what is currently happening. So that's where we're going in SaintLucia. We're hoping to be able to
What's the
introduce
timeline for that?
the healthcare insurance should be in by June of next year.
Okay.
We've done a lot of work already on it. We have the OKEU hospital, the European hospital, that we're hoping to be fully operational by March, but we're continuing to move in. We have a new hospital in the south that we're hoping by next year, this time, that we'll be in that facility. We're spending a tremendous amount of money on our primary healthcare services so that basically they have the equipment to do education, and that when people have their first concern, they're not rushing to the emergency. I mean, clearly emergencies for accidents and stuff like that, but you want people to be going back to their primary. So people have lost faith in the primary healthcare services. And that's all part of our decentralization of local government. So your local governments have to be heavily involved in understanding health. They have to be heavily involved in education, after-school programs, all of those infrastructure, maintenance, they have to be heavily involved in all of those things. So healthcare is a high priority. I was very impressed, the World Bank finally, I shouldn't say finally, understood that both healthcare and education are capital investments.
Correct.
You will never reach your full potential as a country if, in fact, the people are not healthy and if people are not educated, right? So it's not to say it's one over the other.
Right. I think the Caribbean has long pushed education, but perhaps not healthcare. So it's interesting that you're pushing
Well, I think
both.
that the problem is that we've struggled with healthcare in terms of the cost.
Okay.
Right? In terms of how we're going to do it. And, I'm one of these people that, this thing where we recognize through evidence that we have to do something, and then there's just continual debate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You have to do it.
Yes, you have to do
You
it.
can't run away from it, right? And so, yes, it's going to cost us more money. We got to find the money to make that happen. But education, healthcare, security, and economic opportunity. And economic opportunity then has infrastructure, ease of doing business, competitiveness. All those words are in that locked in that box. But education, healthcare, and security means whether you live in a ghetto or you live in a high-end neighborhood, the level of security you have should be the same. Okay? Now, the discomfort is how you're going to solve that problem.
Right.
And, for me, let's look at things. The system of taking a young person on a first-time offense, as horrendous it may be as stealing or whatever, and putting him into your primary prison is now throwing them in a completely different life.
Absolutely.
It is better than LinkedIn when you go there. Yeah? And the stigma associated to it when they come back into society, right? So I'm saying to myself, okay, there's technology out there. What happens if you have a young kid, 18, 19, 20, commits a crime of stealing, right? Instead of putting him in prison, we put an ankle bracelet. So he gets a 5-year term, right, with a probation. So he has his ankle bracelet. Instead of me paying for a warden in the prison, I have now a counselor. So I know where he is on a regular basis. He must report to his counselor.
He's getting help.
We have to get him back into work and put him back on the right life. And the quicker he can do that and convince us that he's now on the right track, the quicker the bracelet comes off. But he continues to report into a parole officer. So at least for the first-time offenders, give them a real opportunity.
I agree with
it's
that.
more cost-effective. I think living in a smaller society where these stigmas are it's like in America. You get busted in Miami and I can go to Dallas.
Correct.
I can go to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I can start my life over again.
Right, it's
Yes,
harder.
it will always be on the record, but it's not. My record's not on my forehead.
That's right.
So I think that we need to look at greater ways. The question is schools. When do we have the most traffic? I don't know if it's like that in Jamaica.
Yes, it is.
Okay? It's during school.
During school.
Right?
Trust me. Yes.
So the question is, are we going to continue building more and more roads for that? Whereas now a kid can get an iPad. He can have all of his books downloaded on an iPad. We can film the best teachers. So let's learn from what's taking place online, online universities. Right? I can go to MIT classes. I can go to Harvard classes now. I can get the best teachers.
But then you'd have to have Wi-Fi all of the island.
Yes, and guess what? There's technology out there now that we can get Wi-Fi off of a satellite. So again, now with the whole climate change issue, right? Instead of me continuing to build and having to put all these things on the ground, do I have now a satellite? So I have my little dish. Hurricane's coming, I put my dish down. 2 minutes after the hurricane's gone by, my dish is back up. I'm connected, right? So yes, Wi-Fi is very, very important. And then the question becomes, create learning centers where a kid's classroom now can be a teacher. And I think this idea of always putting kids of the same age in the classroom, I've always had a problem with that. When we get out into the real world, we don't have that.
That's so true.
Okay? Why am I not allowing kids to integrate in their homework with older kids and younger kids and teaching all of us how to be able to interact with different personalities?
Because everybody has to sit the exam at the end of the thing, and everybody has to be the same age when they sit the exam.
Why?
I agree with you.
And what does it matter if they finish first in the class?
It's always been done that way.
Right? So all I'm saying to you is that I'm not telling you we're going to make these changes, but these are the these are the conversations we start to have. Is there a better way?
Exactly.
So, for instance, I was struggling with this idea that was coming up because people, fall in love with their terminologies. So, resilience is the new buzzword, right? And I have to keep constraining that conversation to physical resilience because otherwise, I think it becomes diluted. Another one that came up was there were smart cities, which I get. So smart cities in developed world was about transportation, green in the space, etc. What's a smart island? And I saw people rushing out to have this terminology. So for me, a smart island all of a sudden is one that says, okay, let's take education. Very important. There's a new test called the PISA test, which measures critical thinking.
We call it PEP in Jamaica.
Okay, PEP. It's more sophisticated than the SAT, SATs.
Okay. No, it's a different thing.
Right, so the PISA, the top countries in the world, Finland, Singapore, South Korea, etc. When you look at the Finnish model, it's more difficult to become a teacher than it is to become a lawyer or doctor. You get paid more, and there's 3 teachers in a classroom.
Oh, yes.
Right? And that there's teachers dedicated to helping dyslexic kids or slow learners, etc. And so they're not keeping the class back. And they spend the least amount of time with homework because the work is being done in the classroom, and they spend the least amount of time in the classroom. And they're continuously ranking at the top. So the question becomes, I want to have the same results. I would say to you that we in the Caribbean, because of the other deficiencies we have in terms of size, natural resources, etc., that we're going to have to be even brighter and more creative than our counterparts are. That's where the game is going to be won. All right? So how do I create an education system that is going to compete with Finland? So I'm already spending $180 million. It's my highest expenditure item. Okay? 85% of that expenditure is staff. 85. Yeah? I have another crisis on my hand in that in 1995, 32,000 primary school students. Today, 16,000 primary students. So decreasing population, yet I have more teachers and more schools than I had before. All right? I have these traffic jams. I have all these things that are going on. So the question is, how do I compete? I can't compete by emulating the Finland model. But I have to find a different way to get to that same finish line. And it's technology. And we have to be quicker to adapt to the technology and embrace it. So an iPad costs $250. The license for all the books to be on it is $100. The iPad can tell a teacher how long a kid has been reading, whether he in fact did his homework, allows a recorded communication between the teacher and the student, so that the parent can always see what is going on. There are direct links to the Wi-Fi in terms of helping that kid. And if I now have filmed the best biology teacher, the best math teacher, the best English teacher, all these different levels, I always suffered from having to pay attention in class. So the ability of going back and replaying something over and over again right? And broadening now people's perspective. Okay, much better. Technology, biometrics, whether it's eye, retina, fingerprinting, or DNA. So if a kid wants to go and sit an exam, what's it cost me? Every Monday we have an exam. I don't care how many times you fail. I want to just know that you have mastered and that you've then moved on.